With Sony's recent announcement of the PlayStation Classic, there's been a resurgence of interest in the PlayStation 1. Though most have taken this opportunity to discuss the essentials that will likely land on the retro mini console, I thought I'd discuss some of the more forgotten gems. At the dawn of 3D polygonal graphics, with the higher capacity that the optical disc format allowed, the PlayStation 1 was home to many niche and experimental games. Here's a list of just 7 I think are worth playing. Mad Stalker. Mad Stalker is a remake of a PC Engine game with massively upgraded graphics and much tighter controls. They're effectively different games, and to that effect the only version worth playing is the PlayStation 1 version, as it's such a categorical improvement over its predecessor. The sprite art for characters is stunning with particularly excellent shading. The stages are a weird blend of 3D graphics and sprites. There's a 2.5D effect, but the backgrounds are sprite art with parallax scrolling, while the ground is rendered in 3D. Klonoa features a similar effect, but the backgrounds do occasionally feature polygonal graphics, and there's rarely any parallax scrolling. The odd approach to 2.5D graphics really pays off in Mad Stalker, as the quality of the sprite art is high enough that the two graphical styles blend together seamlessly. And the gameplay in Mad Stalker is even more impressive. The control scheme is effectively that of a fighting game, and in that respect Mad Stalker boasts an incredibly varied moveset. You'll constantly be seamlessly shifting between melee attacks, firearms and a light sword, and it looks amazing doing so. The spectacle of the combat isn't really matched by much else. The game is very short and there isn't much variety in the enemies you encounter, but fighting through waves of mechs in interesting locations is enough to carry the experience to the end, and it's enjoyable enough to warrant return visits. Policenauts. Policenauts is a science fiction graphic adventure game written and directed by Hideo Kojima. For those not familiar, graphic adventure game describes a style of narrative-heavy game that primarily conveys its story through text with the aid of static images. It's kinda like a visual novel, but with a greater emphasis on player interactions, particularly in Policenauts where there's interrogating and puzzle-solving elements. The closest approximation in the West would be like a fusion between the point-and-click genre and a text adventure. Hideo Kojima got his start in this genre, and in fact 4 years prior he produced another science fiction noir graphic adventure game for the PC Engine called Snatcher, with a number of similarities to Policenauts. It's interesting going back and seeing how Kojima got his start, and seeing how this emphasis on dialogue and story would so greatly influence his direction of the Metal Gear Solid series. And to avoid getting into spoilers, all I'll say is that this is a Hideo Kojima game that is almost entirely about the story. The narrative is fascinating and excellently told. For those interested getting into the graphic adventure or ADV genre, Policenauts is a perfect introduction as it demonstrates the storytelling capabilities of this style. Bushido Blade. Bushido Blade is a single strike fighting game. If you're struck on a limb, you lose the ability to use that body part. If you're struck in a vital area, you die instantly and the match is over. This is a fighting game in its most bare essentials. If you leave yourself open for a second, you will be punished. Almost all of the game is played mentally. There's an intensity to always being vulnerable to attack. The fight could end in an instant just as it could last for minutes without either fighter so much as swinging their weapon. One player could dominate for most of the match, but a single lucky lunge could see their opponent winning. The suspension of combat is matched in the presentation, the lack of music is deafening, the puncturing sound of a successful stab is satisfying, and the settings allude to classics of samurai cinema, like Harakiri or the Samurai Trilogy. Bushido Blade is a wonderfully cohesive game. All facets of gameplay and design work in tandem perfectly. This is such a cult classic that it's almost not a hidden gem anymore, but it warrants being in this list just for those who still don't know about it. Bushido Blade is one of the best games on the PlayStation 1. No One Can Stop Mr. Domino. What a bizarre game. No One Can Stop Mr. Domino is like a fusion between an on-rails runner and a puzzle game. It's impossible to properly convey this game through genre. Basically you're a domino who forms a row of dominoes behind itself on a looping track. Across this track there are trick tiles that activate a quirky little animation which allows you to continue your domino chain further down the track. Activating all the trick tiles unlocks the next stage, and with perfect planning and precise movement you might be able to unlock the next stage in a single run. The only criticism of the game is that you're never directly told any of this. You generally learn how to play the game through trial and error, which might be off-putting to some. Though understanding the basics is enough to have a good time, as No One Can Stop Mr. Domino really excels in its high-concept genre fusion. There is the immediacy of a running game with the strategy of a puzzle game, conveyed with this very Japanese sense of humour. Developing a game with such a unique concept could have been a complete disaster, but no one can stop Mr. Domino's joy to play, and really exemplifies the more experimental and risky games that the PlayStation 1 is so remembered for. Silhouette Mirage. All this game needs is one word, and most collectors for this era will know it's worth playing. Treasure. Treasure have a penchant for taking the conventional and reinventing it into something unique. All of their games have a really inspired approach to game design, and this game arrived right at the company's creative peak. Guardian Heroes, Mischief Makers, Sin and Punishment, Ikaruga, Silhouette Mirage is nestled amongst some of the company's greatest games, and this game certainly lives up to that standard. This is a side-scrolling shooter, but, as kind of a precursor to the similar mechanic in Ikaruga, all beings are split into two opposing colours. You can harm enemies while attacking with the opposite colour, but drain their spirit while attacking with the same colour. Lowered spirit will make their attack weaker, so there's a risk reward to whether or not you kill a powerful enemy quickly, or weaken them before going for the kill. All these same rules apply to you. These mechanics elevate Silhouette Mirage beyond a simple shooter and results in a far more cerebral experience. This is one of just 2 treasure games on the PlayStation 1, so it's definitely worth seeking out. Alundra. Alundra is a top-down action RPG very much in the same vein as the original Legend of Zelda games. The traditional JRPG went through such a renaissance on the PlayStation 1 that relatively more simple adventure games like this are often overlooked. That's a shame, as Alundra harkens back to the nimble and liberating combat of games such as Secret of Mana or A Link to the Past, which offered the immediacy of action gameplay as an alternative to the slower-paced, turn-based games that they shared the market with. Alundra also shares its setting in common with those games, this woodsy, faux medieval world with grim and arduous dungeons. This is all realised through an aesthetic that is strikingly similar to SNES era Square games. It's not surprising that years later Square Enix would outsource their Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest mobile ports to Alundra's developer, Matrix Software. For the first game of the company, Alundra is absolutely breathtaking and a real standout title on the PlayStation 1. Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell is an incredibly unique shooter that so perfectly nails its mechanics that it's really bittersweet that there aren't more games that play like this. You control a spider mech that allows for incredibly fast-paced strafing and wall riding. This makes missions that take place outside feel tremendously liberating. Your degree of movement and sheer speed is unlike any other shooter for the PlayStation 1. And missions that take place indoors are surreal and intense. At first it can be disorientating, but once you master movement, the game can be very satisfying to control. Ghost in the Shell undoubtedly has one of the best control schemes of any console shooter, and it's so distinct and executed so perfectly. This is probably my favourite PlayStation 1 game ever. The only flaw is that it's unfortunately so short. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. Have a nice day. Peace.